Click it. Because I feel like yeah, there you go.
Oh, we're already in. We're in. We're
In it to win
you know,
it.
I think our audience should be more concerned if we show up on time or 10 minutes early. At this point, this should be expected.
Yeah.
But we're live. What is up, guys? Thank you for tuning into the Modern Macho. This is your host, Juan Carlos, and I'm here with my boy Santi.
Yo, what's up, everybody?
We are two gentlemen documenting our journey. We're embracing the dudes that we are in order to become better men for ourselves and our village. We're tired of fitting the mold. We're tired of dick measuring contests, and we're tired of pretending to be somebody that we're not. After each episode, we hope that we're able to plant. Whoa. We hope that we're able to plant a seed, get you to start a conversation with your circle, challenge your thinking, motivate you to focus on growth, and hopefully bring awareness to the twisted programming that we've been brought up with believing. We're continuing on this conversation on Pride Month. We've got a very special guest today that I'm really excited to get into. Yeah, I think last conversation that we had was very productive. I'm going to be honest, just straight off the bat. I think I was very hesitant about being honest with myself, just really having these conversations about homophobia and how I've, upheld these beliefs, and just, there was fear tied to that. And it was very liberating to have the conversation, like to have you listen to, bro. Like, I really appreciated that. I think acknowledging that if I don't talk about these things, it's kind of hard to focus on the man that I want to be, right? And what I want to do for myself. So that was kind of a very powerful conversation, I think, for myself. And it sounds like our audience resonated with it as well. So that was kind of cool.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we're going to keep the conversation going on today. As usual, before we do, talk to me, Papa. How you doing?
Doing good, man. I think this week I'm feeling a little lighter on my feet.
Mm,
I think mainly because of the weekend that we had, which I know you also wanted to talk a little bit
dude,
about. So
yes.
that Reiki workshop was definitely something. And I mean, right off the bat, I know I've shared on here multiple fucking times. I mean, I know it works. Like my me looking at it sideways has nothing to do whether I believe in it or not, because I 100% believe this shit works. It's that I'm fucking afraid of it, dude. And so long story short, it definitely, I had an experience. I don't know if I could say it was like super like, oh my god, like I felt this and that. No, but there was definitely, I feel some healing that took place for me, especially when it came to my inner child, especially when it came to like certain aspects of myself that I repress often. And so with that being said, afterwards I was able to catch up with Vidi, and like, so it's like a two-part breath that you have to do for like 20 minutes. And and so it's pretty quick. Like it's like a right, like pretty much, just to give you an example, like that's how fast you're breathing, with short exhales. And bro, I was going like like, I was
Playing by
taking,
my own rules.
yes. And you know
Yeah.
what you said totally fucking helped, because before going into it, Carlos shared with the group, like, make it yours, it's yours, and that, shout out to Chewy. I know that came
Yeah.
from his yoga sessions that you've done with him. Anyways, long story short, Vidi told me afterwards, I guess she came up to me, and I remember hearing her. She was like doing whatever they do, right? And she was like, breathe, breathe. And I was just like, nope, I'm gonna do my thing.
You're
Uh,
in my world.
yeah, you're my world now. And so afterwards, she was like, "Yeah, I noticed you weren't breathing right." And I'm like, "No, maybe it's because I was already feeling it, and like there was so much sensation that I was feeling that I'm like, I can't keep going. If I knew that if I kept going, I was gonna have to like tap out essentially, and I didn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And then that's when the other healer that we worked with, she was like, no, that's great that you did that, because it allowed you to keep going. Because I think more importantly for me in that moment was not stopping, as opposed to doing it right,
Sure.
or doing
Sure.
it
Yeah.
perfectly. And because I think with that, there was a fear like, man, this shit might not work because I'm not doing it right. Bro,
Correct.
it still touched me in a way, in like a spiritual way, that I don't know if I've ever tapped into. like an out of body experience to say the least. But so it's definitely
Yeah.
cool, man. It was definitely cool. I don't know what your I know you had an experience,
Yeah,
but I mean in general, yeah,
I definitely had an experience of my own as well. And real quick, shout out to Christine, to Vidi, to Myra, to Cesar, really helping putting all this together and everything from the facilitating to providing the space to the food, everything it was
yeah,
awesome, man. I think all 20 of us, you talk about 20 men inside of a room doing something that, a lot of us had never done before. And the men that had done it before, I think they even said like they had never done it in a space with other men. So it was like
right,
it's very powerful, dude. I felt really it's crazy. I felt really connected without even knowing a lot of these guys. The moment I stepped into that room, and I know for me, one of my biggest things in the beginning, and I shared this with you, was I was in this pickle of like, I'm facilitating. I want to make sure that I provide this space for you guys, that we can have these conversations, that we feel safe, that I can validate and, bring some reassurance and listen and stuff like that. And then also understanding that like I was going to go through this experience myself. And so I was in this pickle of like, I'm supposed to help, I'm supposed to do stuff. And I think that's when it kind of shifted for me,
mm,
because very early it was like, dude, and I think I told you, remember, I was like,
yeah,
I literally by name, I could pinpoint one, two, three, four, five, the six people that were around me by name, right? And even
mhm.
Vidi was like, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, once I was blindfolded, it was like my sense of what is it?
Hearing, listening,
Hearing was like on alert, bro. And I was
hmm
like really paying attention to my surroundings, and so I had to catch myself like, hey. And you talk about inner child, and it just brought up this whole like, damn, the old pressure of being the older brother. And so yeah, man, I
mm,
everyone seemed to have their own experience in their own way. But I definitely think that I took a lot away from it. Was definitely really, really cool experience. I didn't know what to expect. Like even afterwards, I was like, holy shit, I didn't think this was gonna be what it was. Um, I even talked to you about we talked about this after, because I didn't say anything to you in the morning. I think we were like,
oh
in
yeah,
our heads about it, right? And
hmm
so when I woke up in the morning, I actually was like, maybe I'll have a drink. Maybe I'll have a drink before we go into this, and that'll help the nerves. And so um I told myself like, nah, dude, don't fucking do it. So then, we went to have breakfast beforehand, and shout out to my guy Al. Dave came with us too, right? So
hell
we
yeah.
went to go have breakfast real quick before, and there was a bar, and you made the joke, or you were like, "Oh, dude,
I
I'm about to
wasn't
grab."
joking. I
Yeah,
was
you
not
well, you
joking.
made I'm sorry, you made a comment. You made a comment, and you
Yeah,
were like, "Shit, I'm about to grab a whiskey coke." And in my head, I was like, "Fuck yeah, bro! Like, do it! Like, I'll give him with you." But
yeah,
for one reason or another, we didn't. We didn't. And then,
yeah. Because you
once
didn't
we
tell me not to either. That's the thing.
no, I didn't. I just said like, you know what? No, I'm gonna facilitate, and like, plus I really want to like
Yeah,
go into this with an open mind. I shouldn't. But yeah, I didn't tell you what to do. But there was this part of me that was like, if you push it a little bit, like I'll be down. You know what I mean? Like we
yeah.
can encourage each other here. And so yeah, we didn't. And once we got there, we showed up early, helped out, as best as we could. And then, dude, once I saw the studio, it fucking hit me like, what the I was like, dude, I should have had a drink. I should have had a drink. I should have had a drink.
Yeah.
Um, I'm glad that I didn't. I'm glad that I went in there just kind of like with an open mind, and fuck yeah, it was an experience. It was such a hit that we actually, before I forget, August 19th, we were running it back in Orange. Um, so just save the date. We'll be putting out details here in the next coming weeks. But in the meantime, if you are interested, if you did it with us already, and now you're a supporter and you want to do it again, save the date for August 19th. If you want to hit up the homies, let them know. We're probably going to cap it again at 20 spots, just because it's such a dope experience that we don't want to overfill the room just for the sake of overfilling it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, if you are interested, send us a DM, and yeah, we'll get all the information over to you. I said in the meantime, save the date, and yeah, but what we're here for today. Talk to us. Drum roll us, son.
Drum roll. Yeah, no, most definitely. So today we have a very special guest. Someone who, they've been an acquaintance of mine for a bit. I can't say that like, like we were like super close, but I've been in learning spaces with them where I'm like, damn, like, they spit a lot of knowledge. They seem like cool ass people. I actually also one of my old jobs, one of my coworkers' partners, and my coworker too, like they mentioned that they know Bri, our guest today, and would always talk highly about them, or anyone whoever I ran into and knew about them spoke highly about them, and yeah, no, definitely very very interested in having them on, you know, just kind of chopping it up, um, just in general, you know, because I think they have a lot of perspective when it comes to you know, toxic masculinity, you know, and yeah, and I think once again, when it came to the learning spaces I was in with them, you know, I think they had so much care uh, in how they presented the information, while at the same time kind of giving you that raw reality of what it is, and how it can be affect others. Um, Bri is a Latinx queer trans higher ed educator who enjoys watching trash reality TV, is a Capricorn, and loves playing Texas Hold'em poker. And so, most definitely, with that being said, welcome, Bree.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going, it's
Welcome,
going.
welcome. Thank you for taking
So
the
happy to
time.
have you on here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And I really enjoyed what you were talking about right now. The Reiki healing.
Yes.
Have you ever
Mm-hmm.
done it?
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings. So my sister
Mm,
actually is she's a healer, and
Okay.
she
okay.
does like chakra healing and a lot of different things. So honestly, I can't take it seriously anymore since she does it. And she's trying to do it
That's
on
fair.
me, and I just laugh because it's my sister. So I think maybe if somebody else was doing it, then I
Yeah.
could definitely join in on the fun. But no, you
That
know, if your
that's
siblings doing it, you're like, eh.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for
you're
sure.
constantly making fun of them probably in your head, like, oh my god, this and that. You know, it's funny because
Yes,
I feel like whenever it's come
yeah.
to like healing to this part, like whatever, like, oh, close your eyes. I had that problem of like laughing or thinking it's like, not that it's
Mm,
silly, because it's
mm,
not, but it's a little silly, you know, like kind of
yeah,
some of the actions if someone
yeah.
were to have walked into that room, then like, what the fuck is going on, you know? And so no, I totally get that 100%. And I
Yeah.
fucking love I love the fact that you love trash TV, because that's totally my jam,
Oh my god,
100%.
it's the best. And my partner hates on it all the time. My parents hate on it all the time. And I'm like, no, it's the best because it makes me feel good about my life. You know,
That's
it
fair.
really does.
Yeah. Wait, so like what kind of trash TV are we talking here?
90 Day Fiance is probably the worst.
Okay.
Like almost every episode I've seen of every iteration of 90 Day Fiance because there's a lot of different ones. I do
Uh-huh.
enjoy watching Real Housewives of Beverly Hills with my mom. Real Housewives of Orange County. Let's see, Vanderpump Rules. Um,
Hmm.
what other trash is there? Oh, Love Is Blind.
I Love Is Blind.
Love
I
Is
watched the
Blind.
first season. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The Ultimatum, the queer one that came out recently. Have you all seen that one? The queer one.
Uh-uh.
Not
The
no.
ultimatum though, that's the
Oh,
one
it's
where
so
like
good.
that's the one where it's like they have a partner who they've been with for a long time and they just haven't popped a question, right? Something like that.
Yes, I've been tempted to put
Mhm.
my partner on that.
Ooh, ooh,
Tell him.
Yeah,
Tell him.
yeah.
yeah.
It's been
I
over
mean,
5.5 years. I'm like, come on, bro, come on. And I
you
want to
know,
propose to him, but he doesn't want me to. So I'm like, okay, I'm over here waiting.
mm, yeah.
I
100.
love
But
that.
like, I know that that's personal stuff, but most definitely, and because I've thought about that too. I mean, I'm married, but even when I was
Hmm.
proposing to my fiance now, or girlfriend at the time, I remember it was like the December before I had asked her. I was already planning on buying the ring, and she was like, "When are you
Yeah.
gonna ask me? When are you gonna ask me?" And I felt like it's like you're about to clean your room. You're a little kid, and your mom is like, limpia tu cuarto. And you're like,
You're like, ya no
fuck,
quiero.
like I don't want to anymore. So there
Yeah.
was almost that sense, but also like, how do I say like, you know, whatever, like it was more of a frustrating thing because I didn't want to kill the surprise, you know. So it's like, how do
Mm,
I diffuse the situation
mm.
along with this frustration of like, "Ugh, just get off my back, you know." No, but 100%. I mean, hopefully it's around the corner for you.
I don't know. I have mixed feelings sometimes about that.
All right.
Let's
You know,
talk. Let's
it
talk.
is what it
Like,
is, you know. But
It
yeah.
is. It is what it
Um
is.
100%. But yeah, no, 100%. Thank you so much for joining us today. Um,
Yeah.
and
Thank you for
and you
having me.
and yeah, of course. And I also want to say, I think this is something that I had mentioned to you. That I do kind of want to make sure it's at least said also in the public space of the fact that, as in your bio states, right? Latinx, queer, trans folk. It's Pride Month. There's a lot of things going on, and I also want this to be a space for you
Mhm.
to not feel tokenized in any way. I think it also even makes me think about this podcast, and when we think about machismo and we're reaching out to men, like what
Mhm.
that looks like, because I think oftentimes that identity of masculinity of being a man, I mean, even for me, feels limiting sometimes, right? Whether that be
Mhm.
because of socialization or what have you, it still felt like it was something important that we wanted to make sure. And but more importantly than that, like I've seen you in spaces where you speak truth and it hits. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Mm.
so I did want to
Hopefully
mention
in a good
that.
way.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think back to
It's
the
in the
spaces
worst way
where
possible.
well, you know what? And for some people, it is in the worst way
Oh,
possible,
that's a
right?
good point.
I mean, it
Because
might be, right?
yeah, I think for some people, it's having them face certain truths that they just are not accepting as valid, right? Because I think that's the big conversation, especially
Mm,
as we've seen with like the schools, all the infighting that's happening with parents, and it's
it's a
like,
lot. A
and
lot.
and it sucks that it gets like masked behind sayings like protect our children,
Mhm.
because it's like, oh, I want to protect my children
Mhm.
too. You know what I mean? That's such a great
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
way to put it out there.
Yeah.
And I think part of the conversation Carlos and I had in our last podcast was like, what exactly are we protecting them from?
Yeah,
So,
it's true. I mean, and when hearing you say that makes me think about my mom and how she wants me protected, right? As a trans
mm,
person who's
Mm.
queer and Latinx, and I think is seen as queer in whatever that means. And so, what does that mean for her as a parent of a trans kid to know that your child is constantly under threat of erasure and violence
mm-hmm,
and um and I will say, more of the, I guess, energy that's strange for me has come from Latino men, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I really don't. And I think that it's potentially a lack of understanding, lack of awareness, the feeling threatened. And some things maybe y'all can educate me. So as I've socialized in some ways, like socially transitioned, not just physically, um, I've come to receive different mannerisms from cis men, assumedly cis men,
mm,
like the nod. I'm like, what is up with the nod? Like
mm.
Mm.
I we recognize each other, and what does that mean? What if we
You
didn't
know what?
nod?
I
And
think about
why
that
are you
shit
nodding
too.
at
Yeah.
me? Is that a respectability thing? What is that? I don't know what that is. And also, like I talked to one of my friends and they're like they're trans too. And they're like, you know, uh I'm trying to learn how to be a man with my mannerism. And I'm
Mm,
like, yeah, I've thought about that too, but it's because of safety. It's not because that actually comes natural to me. It's because I want to
got it.
be able to pass so that people
Hmm.
don't question me being in a certain space.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'm like, what does that mean to be a man, right? In terms of mannerism.
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. And I think even things like that, I mean, I don't know, Carlos, what you think, but I mean, I feel like I've been nodded at where it's like, oh yeah, you see me, I see you. There's a respecting, and it's almost
Yeah.
like a dog sniffing
Mhm.
someone else's dog's territory. Like, okay, I'll kick it right here. What's
Mhm.
up? And
Mhm.
sometimes it feels like, like, what's up? Like, where are you from? Type deal, you know?
Hey, what's
And
up?
so,
Yeah,
and
That
it's
exactly.
same nod could mean
Exactly.
two very
Yep.
different things. Yeah.
also unspoken,
Mhm.
yet
Yes, and
part
I've had
of,
both.
yeah,
And
yeah.
also usually a nod down is like a respectful. A nod up
Mm-hmm.
is like that's
What's
like the
up?
what's up. Like what are you
Yeah,
looking at?
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
Mhm.
hundred
Yeah.
percent.
It's so
Yeah,
true.
and you're right. Like, I mean, what does it mean to like play into these mannerisms that are this like that show that you're a man, or that show you're manly, masculine. Because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
those may not be
Mm-hmm.
the healthiest way of communicating, yet exist. I mean, I wish I could.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I don't know
wild.
what
It
your
is so
thoughts.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something that
Yeah.
and kind of what I oh go ahead, Bree.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
I was gonna say I think one of the things that I think really stands out to me that I feel is of concern, which is I think why this conversation for me is important, is we talked a little bit off air about the discussion and really what we wanted to talk about. You shared a little bit with us about your story, and I think what really stood out to me was just how unsafe you feel, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to me, like that's concerning. Like that's concerning as fuck because
Mm-hmm.
that shouldn't be like, you know what I mean? Like especially knowing, and it's funny, I was looking at your Instagram and Sant and I had really not had this had we haven't had this discussion for the last 3 years that we've had this podcast. And I think part of the reason is because,
Mm,
and I think Sant can agree, we don't really hop on the trends on shit. Right? Like it's not really like, oh, this is what everyone's talking about. We need to talk about it, and I think maybe, I don't know,
mhm,
maybe Sant and I are just at a point where through our own self-discovery and our own growth, there's this empathy of like being open to understanding now how much these conversations are important, that like we were
mhm,
even going into this like very intentionally, right? About like, hey, this isn't about, as Sam mentioned, like we don't want this to come off as a token of like, hey, it's Pride Month. We're talking about it. We're on board. Hey, hey, hey. Like, no, like we are acknowledging that the conversations that we're having all year about masculinity, and homophobia contributes to that. Now, maybe we can address that this month, but this isn't something that we just talk about for the week and then it's like, all right, cool, we go back to what we were doing. And there was some fear tied to that, like just bringing up the conversation, right? Like, how do we bring this up from a place of
mhm,
love that we can become allies as we genuinely want to? And something that you posted that I'm glad I saw your Instagram, because you mentioned, it says, you said, can we have more cis accountability instead of trans awareness?
Mm,
And that
mhm.
to me was like,
Yeah.
we're on the right track, right? Because this isn't, oh, hey, we're gonna bring someone and talk to you so that they can. It's like, hey, I'm just acknowledging that I've contributed to this problem because
Mhm,
I've been very homophobic and I've just chosen to do that, right? You know what really stood out to me about what you're
mhm,
saying right now, Bree, that is kind of wild, is you're talking about trying to figure out what a man is. And as a straight cisgender man myself, I'm also trying
mhm.
to figure that out. And I can't even imagine if I feel unsafe, if I feel like I don't fit in a space and I want protection. I can't even imagine the layers of the discomfort and safety that you don't feel.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's pretty wild. And I will say I do have privilege being more masculine, right? Um, compared to
Mm,
folks assigned male who are trans femme. Right?
mm,
And also, I'm noticing that in terms of being read as a quote unquote man, I also am emphasizing masculinity versus femininity. Whereas I recognize, well, one, I probably don't pass because I don't have facial hair and my voice isn't that deep. And two,
mm,
so when I open my mouth, it's done already. And then two, my mannerisms can be feminine, but from when I'm talking, I use my hands a lot, as I'm doing right now. And what if I'm read as a queer man, right? And even that in itself doesn't feel
mm.
safe. But like,
mm,
should I also conform for safety? And what does that mean in terms of just existing, right? And that's one thing that I
Yeah.
appreciated about being having the privilege of being home with the shutdowns, is that it gave me
mm,
time to just exist in my own self without having eyes on me otherwise, you know?
mm. I
Yeah.
mean,
And that, I
I
felt
feel like,
very safe then.
yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like that totally comes to show like how much socialization really does play a role in who we are. Like one of the things I mentioned in the last, I think in the last podcast, and that really irks me about the let's fucking protect our children thing, is that we're socializing them day in and day out. And if it's not you necessarily, I mean, which it is, right? When the child sees a mommy and daddy kiss, it's mommy and daddy, right? They're you're showing them what love looks like, right? When you go take them to a movie that's like, princess in distress, prince comes to say, right? It's showing you already so many dynamics. You're gonna see yourself and like whoever you identify with, and you're like, that's what I need to be. I need to be Prince Charming, right? I need to be this person that's gonna step up, when violence takes place, and the female character is gonna, right? And so we may not see it that way because we got socialized that way as well, right? And so, you know,
Mhm.
I think for me, it's more like, well, what are we really protecting them from? Because to me, it just seems like we're just socializing them to do certain things. With that being said, I also do feel that, like, yes, our bodies are different, right? Our like bodies do like develop differently, and so I can see
Mhm.
where maybe some lines sometimes are drawn. Yeah, at the same time, I think it's important to be aware of what that necessarily implicates when it comes to the socialization of the next generation for ourselves, how we see ourselves. Because just because I'm built a certain way doesn't mean I can't cry, doesn't mean I can't like do certain
Mhm.
things. Earlier I was thinking about Carlos. I don't know if you remember this. This was like a long time ago. I think we were in like community college at the time, and total just fucking, hard heads. And he showed me this video of like this little cute dog jumping through the snow. And I remember going, oh, like I almost did this innate thing to cover it up, because I couldn't
To
help
cover
but
the
think
awe?
like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
Wow.
could I couldn't I
Yeah.
couldn't help
Yeah.
but think like, oh my god, this is so cute. And it came out and I was like, I
Yeah.
just hardened up, and that's debilitating, I think, to a certain
Yeah.
degree.
That's deep shit. That's some deep ass shit. It is. That's
Yeah.
wild. Yeah, I feel like, something that I've shared in other spaces has been, so I'm not currently on testosterone. I have been on testosterone in the past. Testosterone's fucking powerful. Like when I was on it, I couldn't cry as easily. I thought a
Mm.
lot faster and I had less of a filter and I went more to frustration than sadness. And so I was maybe at a third or half of what a typical testosterone level is. And so I can't imagine being a cis
Yeah.
man born and then socialized and then hormones. Yeah. I almost felt sorry for cis men at that point. Almost.
Almost. Yeah, and that's crazy to think of the science behind it, because I think for us it's just a reality thing. Like we just kind of live
It's
with it.
wild.
And so it's interesting to think of it from that
Yeah, you're
perspective
just
that there
living
is.
with so much shit.
Hmm. Carlos, I don't know if you have any thoughts. I don't know if you remember that day because
I do, I do.
yeah.
I'm just thinking about like just the way we've been told to process everything, right? And I think everything's just been very much fear based. Yeah, I mean it's something that I think is very heavy because it gets thrown with a lot of layers that don't necessarily exist because of the way we've been socialized, right? This narrative of, and this is what I've seen in my experience is like, oh man, it's someone that's trans. Oh, they want to touch our kids,
Hmm.
right? The restroom issue is like the biggest thing, and you know, again, I for the sake of really trying to understand it, it's like, okay, there's a fear to protect our kids, cool. But outside of that, is like, this isn't real. Like, what kind of stuff are we really feeding ourselves that we're looking at consistently? And I mentioned this on the other episode where I'm like, there's like legit pedophiles that are straight that are like legit doing this stuff. And it's
Mhm.
fucked up no matter what, right? But it's like, but we don't seem to have that same approach in terms of like how we're directing our anger. And I think that sometimes that really shifts that bias in what we're really trying to say, you know? Um I don't know. I think I'm just processing as I'm listening, and that's just something that really stands out to me, that I'm like, man, a lot of the things that we hear, and now listening to you, Brie, as well, is like we're literally creating a narrative of someone being dangerous when They literally are just looking for the same safety that we are. And here we are thinking that like we're just pointing fingers at other people.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I was talking to my parents about this past weekend, and I think that there's this idea of indoctrination, right? If it's in education,
Mhm.
K through 12, etc. Um, but I'm like, if indoctrination like that is real, why wasn't I straight?
Mm,
Right?
Mm.
Like I was raised by straight parents. I got told in school that everyone is straight and cisgender. Like there would literally be no gay, queer, trans people.
There's secret
And right?
libraries out there,
Because of
right?
colonization. Yeah, but it's like if this is the rhetoric, like, and if somebody abides very much by the Bible, whatever it may be, right? Like, then we wouldn't exist because how are we even indoctrinated to begin with, right? Because
yeah.
It's
colonizers
a great
came and
point.
wiped it all out. So
Hmm.
wouldn't they no longer exist? This doesn't make any sense to me. And also, just one
Yeah.
note: like gendered restrooms, the history of that starts in the mid 1800s, with men deciding that women needed to be separate from men for their own safety from men
Hey.
when the industrial period
Damn.
happened. So when women started to go into the industries, right, into the factories, etc., back in the mid 1800s, white women, men said, "We're going to protect you by creating separate train cars, separate restrooms, separate libraries for you because we know better than you do." And it all comes back to the
Mm,
patriarchy.
yeah.
How interesting.
That is some shit right there. Like as I hear you talk, I'm more and more interested to hear on like your perspective and views on masculinity, toxic masculinity, and like kind of what, like how like I mean just really a perspective more than anything, because I think oftentimes, like, especially as me growing up through my adolescent years, early adulthood years, for me, like, I felt like being a man was a big part of my identity, in the sense of, like, that's who I am and whatever. And I still think, of course it is on the forefront of other people, that's what they see first. Yeah, like I do feel that I've kind of backed away from it more, and I kind of lean on other identities that I have. But and not that, like, I don't, I feel like, yes, I'm a man, cisgender man, um, but I almost feel like that's one of the identities I've, like, kind of placed down on the surgery table. And, like, let me dissect this a little bit more as I move forward in my being. Because I mean, um, with a lot of thinking of my little nephews, my little niece, like, what are some of the values that I want to instill, and how am I, once again, socialization, what part am I playing in socializing them to be either a cute little girl, a tough little boy. Because I see that often, like, especially with my little nephew, I see him often like, oh, I want to be like you, and and I do have a lot of fun. If you look at me on the
Aw.
surface, I look like a douchebag. I have tattoos, I have a mustache, I have a big ass truck, like,
It's true. It's true.
it's all true. And my
Oh, you're
little
one of
nephew looks at me.
those?
Yes, I'm one of those paisas, dude.
Oh
And
man.
my
I
little
hope you're not
and
like up
and
my
he's got a
ass on
Raider
the
hat.
freeway. I
no,
can
no, no,
okay,
no.
the Raiders I support. I support the Raiders. That's fine. The truck
There
is
you go.
pushing it a little too far.
But you know what? I drive my truck very responsibly. I'm actually,
Mhm.
no, I
That's what they
because
all
I'm
say.
it's a gas guzzler. I can't be like zooming down. Uh,
Some people do that
but
though,
anyway, yeah, some people do that. And whatever. I'm a
especially
safe
cis men.
driver.
Just saying.
That's
Mhm.
fair. I am a safe driver, and I think I've become more of a safe driver since I've met Denise, because she does check me often and says that I drive
Mhm.
fast. So maybe you're right. Maybe you're onto something, and I'm just being defensive. Uh, um, but yeah, I kind of just want to hear more about you, just your perspective on what, like, masculinity looks like, because I don't think to be masculine is wrong, and I think that's what a lot of, like,
Mhm.
cisgendered men are afraid of. Like, what are you trying to say? Like, that's reverse sexism, which I don't think is true either. But, like, chill, like, like, I think toxic masculinity exists, and there's a way to, like, navigate masculinity without being, toxic or a piece of shit, or however you want to put it.
Yeah. I'm thinking of yeah, I'm really just questioning myself in the way that I show up. And I think for me, I try to catch myself in terms of who am I speaking over, who am I interrupting. Um, I man spread at work a lot. I throw
Mm,
my shit all over the place and I take up space. I think in terms of toxicity, uh, yeah, I mean, I think there's an assumption that I'm just attracted to cis women, which I'm not. Um, my partner's a cis man. I I appreciate and recognize that I definitely objectify people in ways that I think is socially acceptable for people like me to do and masculine people to do. And I think also in terms of like really understanding how my cis men friends think and operate, and we're able to have these types of discussions, which I really appreciate, and catching when we're doing that, and catching when, we enter spaces and we demand more just by speaking, or
mm,
have the ear more of other people. And I think that it's really important for me as an educator and as a practitioner, and as a supervisor to ensure that I am also creating space and time for people who are femme or feminine or black women or women in general, right? To have that. And I'm saying creating as if I own the space, and sometimes I do, right? In my
mm,
position of power. Or as a whatever, when next year whenever I get my PhD. Like that's
mhm.
gonna come with it, right?
Yeah,
And so I need to be mindful of that, you know? And even talking to
yeah.
my sister, right? Like to me she's femme, and the way that she is objectified and treated is gross, and to be honest with you I don't miss
Mm,
that shit because I used to get that too. Not anymore. People look at me and they're like, what the fuck are you? But like I don't have to deal with that shit anymore, and there's a lot of good shit
mhm.
that comes with that, and there's a lot of weirdness and awkwardness that comes with it too.
Yeah. No, yeah, 100%. Um, yeah, and I I think even like it made me think about one of my RAs, um she just moved into a new position. She's gonna be a graduate school, and like I feel like um I mean, she's never called me this, but I hope that's what I've been to her. Has been a mentor as it comes to my like me as a professional and whatnot. And so we've been thinking about like like just meeting up, like catching up because it's been some time, and they're going to be
Mm,
starting the grad program that I did this upcoming fall. So I'm
mm,
trying just to kind of get them prepared, mentally prepared, whatnot. Um, and we had mentioned like, oh, we should grab dinner, and I mentioned like, and once again, in my mind, it was just kind of like, I just want to make sure they feel safe. And I mentioned, like, do you mind if I
yeah.
like, or would you like me to invite some of the other RLCs who are my peers, who they also know very well, they worked with
Mm,
very closely, and obviously it was me like trying to make sure that they felt safe in this position. And I also
mm,
felt like, is this overkill? Like, am I just overthinking? Yada yada.
mm,
Point being though, I feel like I got affirmed in that way of thinking because I mentioned it to my wife today, like, oh yeah, like and I kind of like walked her through what I just walked y'all through. And she was like, wow, like I like that's very respectable of you to be mindful of like your power of position, your power of like not just as your
yes.
supervisor, possible mentor,
Hmm.
but also someone who's like a holder of information that they may want to get from me, and
Yeah.
making sure that they just feel comfortable in all of that. Um, and so that's not to say, oh, yay, me. I mean, I did pat myself on the back a little bit, but I
Fuck
think those
yeah.
are the perks of at least being a little bit of aware of yourself. I think because all those things you mentioned in terms of like
Hmm.
how those positions of power and how it affects other people are 100% true. But anyways,
Hmm.
Which I think brings up a great point too of intersectionality, which we've talked about before,
mm,
right? And I think that that is such a key part about all of this, which is really understanding, first of all, having the awareness, right? Like understanding how we are moving in the world and how sometimes even how we're expected to, not for the sake of we're going to, but I think having that
Hmm.
awareness is key, right? And just being aware of our privileges. And it's funny because I feel like that's kind of where I'm at right now with my overthinking, because I think before it was like I was just so ignorant about everything. that I just talked and talked and talked. And sometimes it was like, dude, that I find myself now being on the other end of it, like you said, Son, where I'm like sometimes over empathizing and then catching myself like, you're kind of talking down on people when you
Mm.
do that, right? And what's interesting about that though is like I had an incident with a white gentleman who I might have shared this with you, Son, who came up to
I
me and
think
was
you
like,
did.
he was
About
like, hey
tamales?
bro, yeah, he's like, hey bro, so like, how do you say, you know,
What?
tamales? And I was like tamales? And he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was like, oh, tamales. And he's like, oh, tamale. I just want to make sure that like, that I'm being mindful and that I don't like offend you. And like, mind you, we're
I
both like
cannot.
super cool, right? And so, and I told him like, because I never really thought about it, but I was like, you don't think I fucking know that you don't know how to say it, bro? Like what? Like why would you? But I thought of that incident though, and I realized that it was like, even now, I still think when I catch myself overthinking, Sant kind of brought this up, but it's like, I'd much rather go into it being overly empathetic and like know that I'm being open about it and catch myself and say, hey, you know what, I was wrong. I shouldn't have addressed it this way. Than to continue being ignorant of like, I'm gonna do things my way and this is how I handle it.
Mm,
Because I find myself in this like on
mm,
both ends of those where I'm getting triggered by people doing that to me, and then
Mm.
finding myself of like, whoa, I didn't mean to say that. And like something that came up with that right now was pronouns, and I saw this skit like just yet it was the other day, like a comedian where he was talking about how essentially like if I don't feel the need to address my pronouns, that's fine. But why do we have such a hard time with respecting somebody that has them, right? And then the joke was like he mentioned that we have a hard time with that, but then we'll call Hulk Hogan by Hulk Hogan and not by his name Terry.
Mm.
And he's like, they tell you to call me Hulk Hogan
mm.
and you'll do it, and nobody tells you to change your name. Why do you guys have such a hard time respecting somebody else in the way that they want to be named and addressed? And I think comedy sometimes is such a great way to bring awareness to the shit that we're saying or that we're doing,
Yeah.
because it really puts into perspective like, oh,
Mhm.
that is, when I sit back, I'm like, oh shit, I've gotten triggered by that, but that's so true. Nobody's asking me mine. I can just respect somebody else's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if y'all have heard of Hari Kondabolu. Have you heard of him? He's a comedian
No.
who's phenomenal. He's phenomenal. He's South Asian. He does nothing but equity, justice types of comedy. More recently, he's done it more about his
Mm.
kid because he recently had a kid. But he
Okay.
does it in a way that lands really well for people, and also makes people
Mm,
uncomfortable, but makes them think, which I really appreciate. So you should definitely check him out. Hari Kondabolu.
I'm gonna check them
Mm.
out. I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's some there's some dark humor out there for sure.
yeah, and I never really understood like the pronouns thing because it's like someone else's like and people like like they try to come off as very unfiltered and raw and hard and all this stuff, but as soon as you use the wrong pronouns on them, they fucking definitely get their like they get upset
Oh my
quick.
god, for real.
And it's just like it's just
Yes.
so odd to me that there's this sense of like dissonance on something that for them is so real, but can't validate it for someone else's experience. I think that for me is what stands out for me for sure. Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I think between me and Carlos that we've talked about is like I think in the educational spaces that I'm in, for the most part, by and large, people will abide by like talking, using people's pronouns. It's more regularly practiced, and I know
Mm,
like when maybe it comes to construction jobs or jobs where you're gonna have traditionally more like those manly men who whatever that's not really like a thing that they think about. Um, and so like it's just almost like this like crazy clash of people from different situations. And I think like social media is really boosting a lot of the voices out there. Um, I mean, I don't really have a point to it. To me, it's just more of like it feels like such a point in history where like this phenomena is happening where there's a lot of maybe like clarity for some folks, and for some folks they're just not seeing it. And that's also not to like belittle that side, because I think you know I try my best not to fall into this like divide and conquer type of like fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. And I also understand that's part of my privilege too, because I don't like, there's so much of it I haven't experienced, and it's easier for me to like sit in the flame. And for me, I think that's what makes an ally very important, because I know there's been critiques on what it means to be an ally, which I totally 100% see. One day you could be an ally, one day you can't, and it takes a moment to not be an ally, right? um and I think that's where it's important to have that sense of, I think, integrity, that sense of, that sense of just like, I think at the end of the day, it's love. Like love of like just your community, the people in your circles, and trying to like make things fit. And sometimes I get really lost because I don't know what that looks like. Even the part I play,
Mhm.
and I think we all do play a part. Um, but yeah, and like Carlos brought up earlier, sometimes I'm afraid that I'm gonna get critiqued for not doing enough or not doing it the right way. And this isn't a boohoo thing for me as a sister, because there's so
Mhm.
many fucking um uh there's so much privilege that I've lived off of, that sometimes it's just like, okay, how can I, once again, how can I be that ally and be legit about it? Anyways, I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but, or like a rant, but I don't know. Like it's just, I think to me it's more of a mind fuck.
Yeah, it is. I think that I'm thinking about what y'all were saying earlier in terms of like over empathizing, and I recall a time where I had a supervisor who misgendered me a couple times, and well, more than a couple times. But it was at one point when it was pre-pandemic, we were still working, and she called me, and she called me crying on the phone, apologizing over and over and saying she was not a horrible person because she misgendered me. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? Jesus
Mm.
Christ. First
Like now
off,
you're responsible.
why are you calling me? Yes. First of all, why are you calling me? Second of all, unnecessary. This is way too much. And it becomes, her feeling better rather than me. And I'm over here like, bitch, this shit has happened. And also, like, recognize it, apologize, and move on. Like, that's what
Yeah.
you do. You apologize, recognize, move on, and try to be better. And I think that,
Mhm,
I think that people are afraid of making mistakes. And so they're so worried about the mistake happening that they make the mistake because they're so hyper focused on it. And
mhm,
it's more about leaning into that discomfort. And I think something that I've talked about at work and with some friends is like this idea of cancel culture is so huge, right? And I get
Mm,
it. And I think there's certain people where there's a need for that. Like I think about R. Kelly, right?
mhm,
And I
mhm,
also
mm,
think about, where is the threshold in terms of believing that somebody can do better besides
mhm,
this one moment, right? Like, obviously, if it's egregious, that's something that, like I mentioned, R. Kelly. That's a whole other thing. And so, I just sit with that of like, what does it mean to to overdo it? Where sometimes I think that people by default can be like, no, let's protect. Similarly to let's protect the kids, they're like, let's protect the trans. Like at in other institutions I've worked at, and it's like, bro, you're overcompensating. Like it's not that serious.
yeah.
Like
mhm,
Oh
they'll
yeah,
be
you,
fine.
and that's such a good point, because I think that there's also this. This is where I like now tying it into the mental health, which is also part of this month as well. Is like the inner work becomes really important, because I think a lot of times we're projecting a lot of
Mhm.
traumas with that, right? Like this isn't about, oh, we're gonna hold him accountable because as a man he did this, or because it's like, I just, you messed up, you should suffer, and I'm canceling you, right? Because I always wonder, and I'm like, okay, how much are you really about this though? Right? Like how much are we really trying to, and we've Son and I have talked about this before, like when it was about masculinity, and like we need to get rid of like certain cartoons because the way that they're degrading women, right? And then everyone hopped on board with it.
Mhm.
And I agree the intention was pure. I think the intention behind, like, yeah, we shouldn't be objectifying women. I'm down with that shit. I always try to find where we agree, and I'm like, I agree with y'all that we should not be objectifying women, treating them like pieces of meat. Now, Sa and I have been talking about
Mhm.
this for the last 2 years, and I could tell you right now, getting rid of one cartoon isn't the work. that's not how we actually get closer to this mission. We need to redirect that energy. But to your point, I think a lot of times it's you fucked up. And what that does, right? Because I don't think we realize that subconsciously, maybe we're a little older, right? Maybe we might have enough of that self-awareness to understand it. But especially for younger generations, all they're seeing is you fuck up, you're gonna get in trouble. And I'm not gonna I know I shouldn't throw everyone in a pool, but I could almost assure you that a good portion of us are already seeing that at home. So now to see that at home, that you better not make mistakes because something gonna happen. And now you go into social media and into the world and it's saying you better not make mistakes because something's gonna happen. And how will we ever be able to grow now? You know?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and people exist right beyond a moment of misgendering someone, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a lot. It's a lot. It is. Now, if somebody's outright refusing, that's a whole other story, right? Or somebody's being malicious, and that's another story, and that's another
Absolutely.
conversation. But I think that it's important to recognize and empathize that people make mistakes. And one of my colleagues and I, at my previous institution where I worked at, where we had offices right next to each other, and they're brown, Latinx, non-binary, more femme, assigned male. We were last semester before I left. There were at least 7 times where we were called each other's name in email, phone calls. First of all, my voicemail. Second of all, my name is not the same on an email, and in person. And that was like compounded of us both sharing similar identities, but we literally look nothing alike. And I'm just like,
Hmm.
damn.
Yeah, yeah.
Like,
Oh,
damn,
interesting.
y'all. Like, this is all of these things, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, that's I mean, that must be so fucking frustrating. Once again, like because I think at the end of the day,
I
that's
mean,
what.
at the end, we're just fucking joke about it now.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point.
Um. What one of the things I think too that th- that was being mentioned, I think also like I think one of the in our last conversation, Carlos, like I feel like I really like you educated me a lot when it comes to like I think oftentimes and um I think sorry I just want to like I don't know if it was mentioned but like that fear of making sure that like like Bree with your parents that your safety is intact, right? And I think that safety piece is always a part of like just our survival instincts, but thinking about like how our homophobic actions come from that trauma of either our safety, like making sure I'm not being perceived in any certain way so I'm not a target, um and then how that like then gets externalized in this like aggro mannerism of like, oh well, like that's gay, or like, oh that's this, right? um
Mhm.
I think for me that really was an eye-opening piece because, and once again, that's not so much for empathy on my part, but for myself to have an understanding of how my own fucking mind works, um and I think how many minds work, I feel like there's that
Mhm.
story of like oftentimes the most aggressive person when it comes to these ideologies could be closeted gay dudes, right? And it's like, damn, like I can't
Yeah.
even fathom the mental gymnastics it took for you to get to a point where you're, 30s, 40s, maybe a whole ass family, and you're
Yeah.
you're gay, right? All because of what,
Yeah.
I think to
Sad.
me
So
that those
tragic.
are really sad, tragic stories. Yeah.
It is.
And I think it's happening at a really fast rate. I think what's happening, at least from what I'm learning and from what I'm seeing, is machismo being the issue that it's always been, right? And a lot of us really being defined by this, trying to fit that mold, trying to be that manly man. And now we have a lot of conversations about sexuality, right? More exposure to Pride Month, things like this. And so I think what's happening is it's really shedding to light, and it's really opening those wounds to a lot of insecurities that for a while we've been able to mask. And there's still enough privilege that we can mask it. but it's diminishing, and it's happening at a faster rate where, for a long time we could have said, I'm good at being numb, I don't want to feel, I'm a manly man, blah blah blah. And then now all this is
Mhm.
thrown where it's like, if you know what you like, you know what you like, bro. But we've all kind of been in our own caves trying to handle that, trying to tackle that, trying to bury it under. So again, I
Mhm.
think this really
Yep.
brings that to light, and it's really built on insecurities. And I was guilty of it. I mean, I've told Son, like, I would go as far as just like, the color of the shirt that I was wearing is, oh, it's a pink shirt. Like, that's kind of gay. I won't wear that. Now looking back, thinking like, dude,
Mhm.
if I know what I like, what the hell does that shirt really matter? And as him and I even discussed, is it sounds kind of silly, but at the same time, dudes will kill each other over that, right? It's like, oh no, like I can't have a friend that is
Mhm.
into pink shirts. Like this shit turns very serious very quickly because of those insecurities. And I think not knowing
Mhm.
how to handle those insecurities, like we don't know how to talk about that, right? To say like, hey, this makes me feel kind of weird or whatever it is, because I think that that's valid on all spectrums. Like you said, son, like I don't want the boohoo. No, but I think it's also valid that we're all kind of fallen victims to this.
Yeah.
Now to sit here and be like, oh no, like I'm not responsible because of what I
Mhm.
went through. No, I don't. But I don't think any of us right now are in that space. I don't feel like anybody's sitting here like, oh, why does it? No, no, no. It's I'm aware of the things and how they're making me feel, and then what can we do with that? Something that I did want to talk
Mhm.
about, Bree, is Sa and I have really, us being in a cisgender male community, right, with a bunch of manly ass men, a bunch of degenerates, which is our space, our community, and even within our own, we put each other down,
Mhm.
right? And so, what's been that?
Mhm.
Has there been a challenge within your own community, of supporting each other, of this safety? Like, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think it depends on which community you're talking about.
Okay, okay, educate me,
So, like
educate
the
me.
LGBTQ community, the Latinx,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Okay, okay.
nuances, right? There's the LGBTQ community as a whole. There is trans folks as a whole. There's Latinx folks. There's
Mm.
this past month, there has been a lot of shit on Twitter about if you Google uh, gays against groomers, so that is cisgender queer men who are anti-trans, who talk about trans people being groomers and separating themselves and saying, I am a part of the LGBTQ community, not the LGBTQ community. That is
Mm.
something different than me. And I do not claim them. And it's some deep shit. I think in terms of, I think in general, LGBTQ, let alone just trans, right? I mean, anti blackness is everywhere. And I think that's important to name as a non black person and somebody who is Latinx, who's not black, and acknowledging that, black folks, even within the Latinx community, are constantly under threat and erasure, and let
Mm.
alone being trans, right? On top of that. Um, and I think, when it comes to, um, there is a there will always be, I should say, a limited understanding of the experience of somebody who's trans or non-binary from cis folks. And I think that there have been times where folks are like, I understand. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. You actually don't.
Right.
And that's okay.
Right.
You don't have to understand. I'm not here to make people understand my lived experience because they don't have that lived experience, right? I think what it is about like being respectful, not physically harming anyone, which is a lot to say,
Mm.
and sad that I have to say that. Um, and I think that, in that intergroup mentality of this idea of even calling it LGBTQ community, like there are really conservative, rich, white, cisgender gay men, right? And lesbians who don't give a fuck about people
Mm.
like me. And these disparities that exist, right, in terms of poverty, lack of education, unemployment, more likely to pass in various ways, right? Um, and so I think it's important to be mindful of the nuances of that. And, me getting a PhD next year, Like I've heard like 2% of Latinas, like point something percent of Latinos, whatever the fuck it is. And I'm over here telling my cohort mates like, "Hey, I'm doing it for the decimals because I don't fucking know what I am." In terms of these
Yeah,
decimals, right? Like I don't
Yeah.
fucking know, but it's gonna happen, and I'm gonna be one of them.
yeah,
So I think
Fuck
it's
yeah.
all kinds of complicated and nuanced, and I think that's the beauty of life. And I feel really privileged in a lot of ways to have experienced existing as multiple genders, whether or not that felt good for me in that moment. And it's a pretty badass thing, in my opinion, to have been able to experience that. And I tell the students that I work with that and other trans folks, like, we're fucking magic, right?
mm,
Like,
Sick.
indigenous people, like, pre-colonization and even now, right, of indigeneity have always existed in this way. And it's badass
yeah,
shit. It's a mind fuck in a lot of ways, and it's badass shit. I do
yeah.
have something to ask you all,
What's
for
up?
me to learn more. Something that I've noticed is like men when they greet each other, even at conferences. I don't know if you've noticed this, Santiago, are like, "Hey, bruh," and like get their hand out and clasp, and then like pat on the back twice, but you can't hold it there, and then let go. And I'm like, why are you greeting me like that? They just give me the side
Mm,
hug, and I'm like, this
mhm,
is so coded and so layered
yeah,
in so many
mm,
ways. So do you not see me as a guy, even though
yeah,
you say you do?
yeah,
And also, like, what does that greeting look like? And with me or with assigned female people, you have to be a little softer.
yeah.
And
You
I
know
will
that.
never forget the last time I went out to a straight club, which I default all of them as straight unless they're designated queer. Um, I was in this little mini dress in Vegas, and I will never forget. Like when I talked to some guy, I was like, "Okay, bro," and I like did that, like that bro hug with the hand clasp, and I'm like, "I'm not a fucking woman."
Mm.
Who the
Yeah.
fuck
You
does
know,
this?
yeah. I don't know. I feel like that's some shit I never even thought about. I know I do it mainly with people who I already know. Um,
Mhm.
Now, like, so I feel like there has to be like a built-in relationship. Um, However, I think what's more like interesting, I think what you mentioned is more of the disparity in how I greet people, and how maybe when I
Mm,
greet someone that way, who like you said, like you mentioned yourself, for example, right? I probably wouldn't do that to you, right? And I don't know if I would or wouldn't, but let's just say in the sake of
yeah, yeah.
discussion, like I wouldn't have. I think in part it definitely would be like the sense of like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that sense of like, of I think hesitancy, and I think hesitancy has kind of been a
Mm,
theme that we've kind of brought up a few times throughout this conversation, where it's like,
mm.
well, I don't want to come off X way, right? I don't want to come off aggressive. I don't want to come off this way or that. But I will say that I think by and large, the reason we do that is to show love and embrace man to man in a way
Yeah.
that isn't gay, right? That isn't seen as this way,
Mm.
right? And I think that really is the raw truth of
'Cause
it.
God forbid you use both arms, right?
Oh, here's what's interesting. I
One
will
hundred
say
percent.
this. The first person that came to mind was DJ. And I'm like, hey, shout out
Hmm.
to my guy DJ, because my guy DJ gives the best
He
hugs,
does
bro.
give big old
And,
bear
and you know
hugs.
what? And DJ's the kind of guy that, like, if you try to get away with the one arm little side hug, that motherfucker will not let you.
Yeah.
Like, he will bring you in. And and I will say that I think, personally, I think I've breaking a little bit of that barrier where I am. And you know what? I've found myself now being the one to give other men
Mhm.
genuine hugs, because I felt like it's been
Mm,
so powerful for
I
me
love that.
to receive a genuine hug from DJ. And the thing is, like, you're
Mhm.
talking about DJ is like tough, fucking muscular dude that's such a badass, not just physically, but just mentally. Like, he's one of my role models. And then so to see this guy to be very loving, that I'm like, this is
Mhm.
sick, dude. And then we can go and do a Spartan race in Big Bear and sweat our asses off, right? And do manly physical stuff. And so I think that that's kind of giving me the inspiration to pass it down to other men of like, sure, maybe it is a little uncomfortable for them. Like, I see with my dad, I give my dad those two-handed hugs now. And like maybe
Mm.
it's weird for
Mm,
him, but like we start to normalize that, you know. I also think there's another part of that too, Brie, which is like, how do you like to be greeted?
and that's something that's not asked, right?
Right, right. Because I
Yeah,
think
there's
that's what I was
assumptions,
thinking.
or even like
Like you
I
said,
remember
like
my yeah,
Sam brought up. Sorry, Sam brought that up. Like overthinking it, but I was like, yeah, I think I overthought it for a split second. But then I was like, you know what? No, like Bree, how would you like to be? How would you like to be greeted? Would you like a hug? Would you like a high five? Would you like some knuckles? Talk to
yeah.
me. You know?
Depends on the person. I personally don't like being touched.
Okay.
So at a previous workplace, everybody gave each other hugs, and I'm like, oh, absolutely not. People would be
Mm.
like, hey, can I give you a hug? Or they go in for it, and I'd be like, actually, no. And so whenever they get a hug from me, it'd be like, wow, this is a miracle. I'm like, yeah, actually, I don't like people touching
Mm,
me. I just noticed that socializing, right, of how that happens
yeah.
with certain people or not. And I'm like, I wonder, why does this happen?
Yeah.
Why does this not happen? What does this mean?
Yeah. And you know what? And I think where your mind is going to is probably super valid in the sense that it is 100% possible that person may not see you as that masculine man that you know you feel you may or may not be, right? Just totally depends. And so um yeah, I think that there may be partially that, but I think there's also so many complex pieces that I think makes this
Mm,
deep puzzling of the mind really difficult. Because it's like, what part are we focusing on? And I think we kind of have to be self aware enough to be able to focus it all at the same time. And I think that's really a big part of why we want to have this podcast and these discussions is to build that self-awareness and ability to, you know, work with one's mind. Even calling it back to the Reiki thing, the whole Reiki thing that we were able to do. My boy
yeah.
Leroy, shout out to him. He mentioned, or was it may have been someone else, but anyway, shout out to Leroy, anyways, if it wasn't you. Someone mentioned like that they were able to get so much more out of this breathing session because of all the work they've already
Mm,
done. Because it's not just a Reiki session and that's it. There's so much pre work that should be given day in
mhm,
and day out and on top of that, yeah, like do these things as well, right? Because I think that's one of the things that Carlos and I try to talk about is diversifying our mental health and how we focus on it, right? Like
mm.
it's not just going
I
to the
love that.
gym, it's not just, you know, reading a book, it's not, no, you have to really like immerse yourself in this way of thinking to the
Yep.
point that you
Yep.
identify yourself as not just a man, this and that. I identify myself as
Mhm,
self-aware. I identify myself as someone who is emotionally intelligent, X, Y, and Z, right?
mm, mm. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think doing that work, because it is work. It's work to be conscious and to be self-aware and to catch yourself as, biases are coming up. Um
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's really, really important to be able to find that groove. And I mean, I think therapy is amazing, and I also recognize how shitty our healthcare is in this fucking country. Like,
Mm-hmm.
shit is so fucking inaccessible, and I fucking hate it, and that obviously leads to, like, continuation of mental health. And I did put it in my bio. I'm neurodivergent, so I have major depressive disorder. I have generalized anxiety disorder. Also, I'm diagnosed with gender dysphoria. So, like, to be trans in medical eyes, in order to get accessible healthcare, you have to be diagnosed with the mental disorder. So just
Mm-hmm.
naming that, that's fucking wild
Yeah.
Wow.
to me. And I told my
Yeah.
papa that. I told papa because I had surgery in January, top surgery. Fucking amazing. People who have not had breasts, oh Jesus Christ, I am so envious of you your whole life if you haven't experienced that. But I told papa, I was like, papa, like this costs $55,000, and if I didn't have insurance, I would have one had to pay for that or fly somewhere where it would be cheaper, and two, I have to go through a years long process in order to get approved by my
Mm.
entire medical team. And I don't feel like women who get breast augmentation need to do that, right? Like, I
Mm.
feel like there are not certain requirements for other people to get gender affirming care. And when
Uh,
I told him that I had to be diagnosed and shit, he was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Papa, this didn't just happen."
yeah.
Damn, that's
His mind
wild.
was blown. Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually talked to I've talked to a couple friends that are therapists that have their own private practices now, and they've even just talked about how their issues with the healthcare system too, where it's like if they're not providing a label to you having something,
Shit.
it's like that they cannot one, they cannot keep seeing you, or two, insurance won't cover.
Mm.
Which is wild to me because I
Mhm.
think like I mean I guess I feel very grateful that, to be where I'm at, but I'm like, dude, I can't imagine like having a suicidal thought, which not discrediting it, but also knowing that it's like, bro, when I have never felt shit and I did not embrace anything, the first time that I did, I just want to die. Like I just don't want to feel any of this, right? And
Mhm.
then so to think that because of that, I could now be labeled with something that could literally be carried with me for the rest of my life. And now is like at the forefront of all my paperwork.
Mhm.
Um, when really now looking back,
Yep.
I'm like, all I really needed was to be heard. You know, like, you know what, son? You know, you are, and obviously you're not, but like you're going through a divorce. Like, no wonder you feel, this is a lot to feel, which is like that's so valid, right? And that should be given attention, but that doesn't mean that
Mhm.
Santi's incapable of handling those situations. And yeah, that's a whole nother layer that I'm not fully educated in. But it is fucking wild to me the extremes at which we have to go sometimes just to be able to
Yeah.
get the benefits that we really need, you know?
Yeah, it's some shit, and I really hope that whoever's listening, y'all have access to healthcare, or your county does, right? Or your state
Yeah.
offers that type of support. Like LA County has been fairly decent about offering services to residents. You just got to look for it though. But then if you have a language barrier or you're undocumented, like there's so many other layers that could prohibit
Yeah.
somebody from
Yeah.
accessing that.
Yeah,
You
for
know what?
sure.
One of the philosophies you shared with us in terms of speaking of therapy, you talked about like everyone can use therapy, and I 100% agree. Like speaking on like diversifying like how we focus on mental health, right? I think I every time I speak with, especially my student leaders, like, and I never tell them, hey man, you should really go see a mental therapist, like, because I'm not trying to like make it seem like that either. But like if especially if there's things that are coming up in one-on-ones that I'm like, oh man, like I don't know, like I don't, it almost feels unprofessional to give you advice at this point. Like I do bring up
Mm,
like, have you ever thought about like, going to see a therapist, and I talk about
mhm,
like not just me going to see a therapist, but that I think it's important that you're seeing a therapist like through thick and thin. It's like eating a salad. There's never a bad time, or eating healthy food, right? There's never a bad time to eat healthy food. You know what I mean? Like you could be as fit as my boy DJ, who's like ripped to the gills. Like, yeah, you
shit.
still eat a salad. It's not gonna hurt you. Like there's probably still good that you can get from it. um and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I think it, like, for me, very important to normalize therapy, because I think that's one big thing that that we're still seeing among male communities, as a stigmatization of therapy.
Mhm.
And I want to pick your brain on, like, and I know we're running a little bit on time, but I do want to pick your brain on what you said about you don't pay rent in other people's heads, because I thought that was so interesting, and I also couldn't decipher what you meant by that.
Yeah, I think so. This is something that helped me a lot when I started therapy after college. Was a therapist shared this with me. It was similar. I don't know if this is the exact verbiage of like you don't pay rent in other people's heads. So like I tend to, because of my anxiety disorder, I tend to live in extremities of the worst case scenario. And I also feel like I'm very self-conscious of like, oh shit, this person didn't respond to me within like 36 hours. Do they hate me? Like, oh, everybody fucking
Mm,
hates me or is judging me or whatever, right? But people are fucking busy as fuck. Or like that person didn't like left me on red, right? And
mhm,
Yeah.
like I think I live in people's heads. And so sometimes even at work, it's political bullshit, right? In academia at least. Um and if I'm living in somebody else's head, what the fuck good is that giving me? It's not getting me anywhere. And
mm,
I shouldn't do that and live in somebody else's head because I'm not paying rent to be there. Right. So why do I give a fuck? Because I have no control over that. I can only control what I can do and my situation and my existence and my actions. So I need to let go of that and move on or distract. or
Yeah.
do other forms of therapy that
Mhm.
that will allow me to do that and not live in somebody else's head, you know? And I think that it's important to not do that because there are narratives that we could create, right? Or one could create
Yeah.
about other people's thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's
And I
where that
think an
comes from.
important Yeah, an important thing to know in that I also think also important to maybe under like or voice the fact that it's not about not caring about other people because I think that's sometimes an extreme. I
Mhm.
see a lot of guys go through. Well, then fuck them if they're not paying my rent. Like that's so easy to take these cute little sayings and take it to a fucking extreme that
Yeah.
I do feel men
Yes.
oftentimes do, or just people in general too.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I just want to
No, men do
voice
that.
that there's an asterisk there, I think, that was unspoken but implied while you were mentioning it.
That reminded me of the defensive. I don't give a fuck about what people say about me, and it's like, and then sometimes I'm like, it sounds like you are though. Like, you
Yeah, a little
know what
bit.
I mean?
You're literally talking about it. Like somebody actually came into my DMs last week and it was fucking wild saying like they were a rando person. I don't know. I don't think they were a bot based on their profile. And they were saying, why the fuck do you talk about being trans all the time? It's fucking dumb. Why don't you get a fucking hobby? Like a bunch of shit. And
Sheesh.
yeah, I'm starting to get shit like that given the rhetoric right now. So
Mm.
I've had a few people come into my DMs like that. And he was like, nobody gives a fuck that you're trans. And I said, well, apparently you do because you're over here DMing me about it.
Yeah.
You went out of your
Like
way to
clearly
hit me
you
up.
give a fuck.
Yeah.
Like
Well, and that's it's
like literally, right?
I truly
Shit.
like I truly believe that throwing fire at these fires doesn't like help. But it's like it is so interesting to me. I think it's like a perfect mix of lack of awareness and privilege, right? That you like we've
It's wild.
privileged enough that I could go out of my way to DM you because my voice matters more than what yours voice matters.
Yes.
And then this lack of awareness of like,
Yes.
why the fuck am I going out of my way to give somebody else hate? And look, I'm not throwing shade because
Hmm.
I've been there, right? I've been there. Like I've been young and naive and like just hurt,
Hmm.
right? Hurt. And I've done stuff like that. And so that's why like to go in there and be like, what the fuck are you doing? But there's this part of me that's like, damn, that's where like San said, I always wonder like, what would it be like if we were all cornered to have to go with an open mind to therapy for 6 months? And then let's all come back to the table and let's have these conversations, right? I
Yeah.
really wonder what those conversations would look like because I still think that we would have different opinions. And I love that. I love that everyone would bring their own elements to it. I feel, and I know it sounds all cheesy and shit. And I'm turning into this fucking hippie, I swear. But like, I feel like it would just really bring this element of like, cool, where do we agree? What do we want? And how can we really work together towards that? Where I'm not projecting my shit on you because I've been heard before. I've been understood. You've been heard. You've been understood. So this isn't about trying to get attention. This isn't about trying to project my pains. It's really about trying to come to a solution where we can come together. And that's where I feel like therapy can really save us. But
Yeah. And I also want to like add on. I also think like to a certain degree, I don't know if it's so much about like us fully coming together and like fully integrating to the point that everyone is fucking best friends. Because I think even like sometimes you don't like people.
no,
Sometimes
for sure, for
there's
sure.
certain divides that you have
No,
with
some
fucking
people's
people.
existence just annoys me. Like go exist
But
somewhere
see,
else.
therapy
Yeah.
again, boundaries.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you
Yes,
can live in
on
your house
point.
happy, I can live in my house happy. It's not we all have to fucking live in the same
Well,
house, you know?
boundaries and the
Hmm.
fact that you just respect other people's existence, like
Exactly.
and I think that that is such a fucking fundamental thing that I don't understand, where people just this exists. It literally just exists. That's
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
Yeah,
even that
that I
is
know
like,
that was the wild shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, one
Unfortunate.
hundred percent. And yeah, I feel like these are conversations that once again, like we need to continue perpetuating it in our communities because, I think
Mhm.
even like you know, I think I mentioned this with you all when we met up last week. I was like, like when it comes to this podcast, I think about even people like my dad who's so like, like he's not out there being a fucking like a warrior on Twitter and shit. Like, but like, I'm sure even him, like if I were to have this conversation with him, he might have some fucked up ways of thinking. I remember times where like I wore like skinny jeans and shit. I had long hair, and he literally asked me like, "Are you gay?" And I'm like, "No," And so once again, like
I not.
he didn't like, he didn't harm me in any way, but like once again, just
His thought
ways of
process
thinking.
into asking the question, right?
That's it, and hopefully getting
Yeah,
to a place
like,
of
oh, the type of
healing.
jeans you're wearing equals gay. Yeah,
Yeah.
Right, and my long hair, which I have beautiful fucking hair, just
yeah.
That's
FYI.
debatable, but that's a whole nother hour conversation.
Oh my god. But yeah, before we do close out, I don't know, Bri, if you had anything you wanted to share, or I don't know, like, I know you put you share your IG with us. I don't know if you want to share that here.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's so totally up to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if people wanna follow me, they can. I'm, at not your token trans. People can follow me if they'd like. I post a lot of gay shit and queer shit, and trans shit, and yeah, it's a good time. I try to post a lot in my stories about current events that are happening and my thoughts, like about this submarine that's lost in the ocean, which I had so many thoughts about.
Hey.
Um, yes, yes, fascinating.
What now? I have to know
But
what are
yeah,
your thoughts, because that is a hot topic.
I'm like, it's a lot, and this is probably gonna date this episode, but like, okay, if you're paying fucking 250, me and Papa were talking about this. If you're paying $250,000 to get your ass down to a grave in the ocean, like,
Mm,
imagine where that money could have gone, right?
yeah,
And people care about these people potentially dying, and I'm not saying it's sad. It's not sad. It is what it is, right? And yet people crossing the Rio Grande every day die, and people don't give a
yeah,
fuck. So
yeah.
like I'm just like, who are we caring about and why? And like it's just
Hmm.
a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, and
And
you know
also
what?
that would be a really shitty way to die.
Yeah, and I feel like the reason why people don't care is because, well, they're breaking the law, they're criminals, and then there's
Yeah.
policy now that people are
Yeah.
influenced by to help them either humanize or dehumanize someone, which is some deep shit.
Mhm.
That is definitely
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
whole nother layer of
Which and
conversation.
that's why I
Mhm.
say, like, where it also gets kind of fucked up because it's like at the end of the day, it's humans dying,
Yep,
right?
one hundred
But now
percent.
we're throwing so many layers
Yes.
onto it that it's like, well, which ones matter that die, which ones don't matter that die,
Yeah,
which ones matter how they,
Mhm.
like, all these layers that kind of get add to it, and so
yeah,
not taking away, I think, from our concerns, our worries, our angers, our frustrations, because I think all that stuff is very, very valid. Um, and just how interesting it's like, man, at the end of the day, like people are just dying. And I think Son and I've talked about that too. Is like sometimes even that disconnection of
It
like, fuck,
is.
we throw so many layers that it's like
Yeah.
we can't even grief sometimes, right? Like some of that
hmm
shit is just it's wild. And now here we are trying to encourage people to show
Mhm.
up with empathy to conversations, and we don't see enough of it.
Yeah, I will say, man, there's been so many fucking memes out there regarding the submarine shit
I saw
that
the
I
whale
can't,
one.
man. Some of them are pretty fucking funny,
Have they
We're
dog.
going
really?
to
I
hell.
haven't seen the memes yet. Are some
Oh,
of them
dude,
with
they're
the
all
orcas? Like the orcas are
Yeah.
the ones who did
yeah,
this?
they're the
They're
orcas.
like interviewing him. Oh man, it's so bad.
That's
It's so
one of
Yes.
them.
bad.
Oh my
Denise sent
god.
me
I'm
some
so happy
bad
for the
ones
orcas.
yesterday.
That's funny.
The orcas. Have you seen Blackfish? I mean, well, that's all. Blackfish. If you want to learn more
Yes,
about
I
orcas,
have.
is a great documentary. Oh, it's so fucking good.
Yes. Yes, yes.
But
Can I add one
anyways,
thing?
um,
Just really
yes,
quick.
yes, please do. Hmm.
For folks as a phenomenal resource. If people want to learn more, I
Mm,
would highly, highly recommend that they watch the documentary on Netflix. It's called Disclosure, and it's a
cool.
documentary that Laverne Cox hosts, interviewing
Mm,
trans actors, actresses, and talks about the way in which the media, from the inception of theater and cinema, has perpetuated
mm,
tropes about trans people and the erasure
mm,
of trans men specifically in the media,
mm,
and a lot of stereotypes. And it's fucking great. I mean, I think for trans and non-binary folks, it may be a little triggering. About 98% of it is trans made, and so I highly
mm.
recommend it. It's called Disclosure on Netflix. Netflix.
Most definitely. Hell yeah. You know, I was actually by told like, had nothing to do with this episode, but um I walked into the house the other day and Denise was watching this documentary on Elliot Page, who Elliot Page,
Mm,
they were the actor
yes,
at the time, actress of Juno, and was the main star. And I fucking love Juno. That's such a fucking good movie. But talked about like just their whole journey going into, disclosing that they're trans, disclosing their LGBT, they're just their overall identity, because I think it
he's
seemed to be
amazing.
layered, yeah, and it was just so like,
Mm,
candid, so just matter of fact, and it was
mhm,
really cool because I don't I knew about their, like, during the pandemic, that they came out as trans, and that they had procedures done, but I think to that extent and that personal, I was like, oh wow, like it was eye opening, and it was also like, just one of those document, and it's really short. It was like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And then just one of those things where it's like,
mm.
man, you just want to hug someone. You just want to like be there with them and show them love
Yeah, he
that
is so
they,
wholesome.
yeah, yeah, they obviously didn't have at the time. And so, you know, and I think that's also why it's so important to just have love for one another, because you just never know what somebody's going through, having that empathy,
Hmm.
which is hard sometimes, so I think we just fucking do our best, because I know they're, speaking on people that like sometimes you just don't fucking vibe with, well, I know they may be having a hard time, like like, I want to be nice to you, and like, shit happens, we all have fucking emotions, so be nice to yourself first.
Yes, like think of some very specific white women I've had those feelings about.
There you go. Yeah, it's all tough. Carlos, you got anything for us?
No, I'm processing. Bri, I really appreciate you joining us, really taking the time to have this conversation. I think for me, this has been a very powerful conversation. I think a very much needed conversation. I think it's opening my mind and even my heart to just like something that I think stood out from the beginning, that even right now you're talking about disclosure and how media has created a mold
Mm,
of trans community, and I'm just thinking like, fuck, like I relate so much to that journey in terms of masculinity, right, and how I'm supposed to be as a man, and so it's just very, I just feel very grateful that we've been able to share space, that we've been able to chat, um, that you've been so open to having the conversation. Hopefully you've felt the same and have felt safe enough to really talk to us about these things. Um, because again, I think we're all just trying to figure this shit out, right? And as San said, I think it's like we're all kind of trying to be, and we have our challenges, and I think that it really comes back to that empathy factor that is so important. And now again, realizing like, damn, we all have our challenges, but these journeys are really fucking parallel, and as I told you in the beginning, like there are certain layers to that
mhm,
that I don't understand, and I'd be lying to you if I
mhm,
said that I did. However, like, I can always lend an ear, as well as I know that I'm a very willing individual when it comes to learning, when it comes to admitting when I'm wrong, and when I really want to challenge myself in order to do better. And I know that our community is the same. I know that a lot of these guys have just
mhm,
accepted that we do the things that we've been told to do, and we're just at a point where we don't have answers, but we know that we want to change some of this shit up. And that's a big part of starting like, hey, this is where we're at, right? This is where I'm at. It's uncomfortable to see two dudes kiss. That's where I'm at.
mhm,
Let's talk about that, where
mhm,
that comes from,
mhm,
and fucking head in the right direction, because
mhm,
you're the traditional I love everyone but, right? And I joked about it with Sant, and I was like, that's like when someone says like, I'm not racist,
mhm,
but, and you're like, they're about to say some racist ass shit, right? And so it's the same thing
mhm,
where it's like, I just want to say I love everyone, and that's it. The period comes after that. So I want to talk about it. I want to figure this out. And so,
mhm.
um, a big shout out to our community that's been so loving, that's been so supportive, because sometimes it is challenging for Sant and I to have these conversations. Um, but they've shown nothing but love. So once again, Bree, I
Yeah.
appreciate you joining us, sharing space. Any last minute thoughts?
No, I appreciate y'all too. And I think, when it comes to the experiences of trans non-binary folks, just believe them. I mean,
Yeah,
wild
yeah,
shit
no doubt.
happens. And also, if they share something with you, believe them and just engage, right? In terms of active listening. Um, and yeah, that's about it. But thanks y'all for having me. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to follow me on Instagram, you're welcome to. You could DM me if you want to chat more.
No, no hate though. No, none of these fucking bots.
Yeah, we're not dealing with that bullshit.
Oh, I have screenshots of that shit. I can show you for real. I have
Oh
screenshots.
my god.
I'm serious. I took fucking screenshots and I sent it to my friends, and I'm like, fucking Christ. Like, can I just fucking like have an Instagram that's public? And my friends are like, oh, you should make it private. And I'm like, I don't want to fucking make it private.
Yeah,
What if I don't
Yeah.
want to?
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't have to do that,
totally
right?
fair.
It's some shit.
Absolutely.
Yes, but please do not come into my DMs like that, or I'll be taking more screenshots.
Yeah.
Call them out.
Call
Or
'em
you know
out.
what? Or and you know what? Here's the thing too. Call them out so that we can really sit down and figure out what we're saying. What the fuck is really going on? Right? What are we really trying to say? Like what really is happening? And like
Some
again, let's
shit.
start there. Like we said, hey, dude,
Yes,
you know,
and it was a
why
young man of
is it
color. It was a young man of color.
why is it so triggering to see someone express themselves freely? And I wonder what it is that bothers them that they feel the
To
need
go out
to
of
go
your
out of their
way to
way
do
to.
that.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, let's talk about that, right? Again, because that hate to hate don't do
Mhm.
shit. So what's up, dude? We get it. Like, so what's up? What are we really? What prompted you to go out of your way to do that? Why was that so triggering? Um,
Yeah, that's wild.
but
It
yeah,
really
man,
is. But
talk,
yeah,
talk,
you can come into my DMs if y'all want. Just keep that kind of shit away from me.
play nice, damn it, play nice.
100%.
Well, I appreciate you, son. I appreciate you. Appreciate our community. I love all y'all. And unless you guys have anything else, man, have a good night.
I'm
Stay
good.
on, Bree.
Good
Stay on.
night.
Yeah.